Wow. Hello, Oakland. Let us pray. No, I'm just kidding. I do so many events in churches, and I'm like, if you only knew. I hope it doesn't come down on us, but it would be my fault. I take the blame. But no, truly, it's a pleasure to be here, especially with Tommy Orange. So thank you for coming out tonight.
Hey, everyone. I'm going to have my phone out because I have questions that I prepared, and I'm very nervous to be interviewing Roxane Gay. I like to say that because I want to give a reason why I'm stammering, and I would be doing it anyway because this is a big crowd and public speaking is not something that I like doing. Another thing I like saying to diffuse the energy of my own nervousness in front of you. But first, let's just can we give Roxane Gay just a big round of applause for a decade of work that this book represents. So before we start talking, having a conversation, she's going to read for us a piece, How to Build a Monument. And I wanted her to read that because the book is a monument to a decade that we've all lived through, that has been very trying, horrifying, and to have a voice like hers to help us feel sane through it has meant everything, which is why she deserves more than the applause for the work that she's put in. So I think first we're going to have her read this essay, however much she wants from it, How to Build a Monument.
Thank you. And yeah, I'll read part of this essay. I wrote it because a few years ago, there was a lot of talk about tearing down essays, and white people in particular were profoundly in their feelings about it because they love to commemorate colonizers. And so I wrote this essay about monuments and what they represent to most of us. And I'm old, so I have to... The Great Pyramids of Gaza, the Great Pyramid of Gaza, oh my God, Gaza, of course, you know what's on the mind. The Great Pyramid of Giza is as miraculous and majestic as you might imagine, if not more. It was built with 2.3 million blocks of limestone and granite, reaching far into the sky, a monument to the pharaoh Khufu. I saw other pyramids in and around Cairo that were equally awe-inspiring, constructed in seemingly perfect proportions, still standing after millennia, despite desert winds and the blazing sun and millions of visitors eager to see a wonder of the world. In Luxor, we visited the Valley of the Kings and descended several stories below ground to see tombs that are still preserved, the walls adorned with elaborate hieroglyphics, resting places for Tutankhamun, Ramses II, Ramses III, Amenhotep. The temple of Hatshepsut stood at the top of a very long staircase, its columns proudly erect, because Egyptian pharaohs built such monuments to honor the deities, to honor themselves, to honor their reigns. An avenue of sphinxes once connected the Temple of Luxor and the massive complex of the Temple of Karnak, and some of those sphinxes still remain, standing guard for what these monuments represent. In Agra, India, the Taj Mahal serves as a monument to love, built to honor a beloved wife. In Rome, the Colosseum is a monument to human brutality, gladiators fighting to the death for the merriment of the masses at the will of bloodthirsty rulers. The Arc de Triomphe in Paris looms over Place d'Etoile, a monument to the French armies and the French Empire. A gift from the French, the Statue of Liberty is a symbol of what were once open American borders, the promise that immigrants would find safe harbor. 2 acres in Washington, D.C. are dedicated to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. Nearly 60,000 names are etched into long slabs of black granite. The memorial to the murdered Jews of Europe in Berlin stands where the Berlin Wall once divided West and East Germany. The memorial is marked by 2,711 concrete slabs, the scope of it an overwhelming reminder of human atrocity. The first memorial to the victims of lynching opened in 2018 in Birmingham, Alabama. The National Memoriam for Peace and Justice features 800 steel columns, each bearing the names of counties where Black people were lynched and the names of the Black lives lost to an abhorrent practice. In the museum, visitors learn in detail about the extent of lynching, how an entire people were terrorized by the threat of noose and limb. The Cape Coast Castle in Ghana still stands, allowing visitors to walk through the dungeons where Africans were held before making the transatlantic crossing. There are spaces to leave memorial wreaths and tributes to the people once held in such a terrible place. At the United Nations headquarters in New York, the Ark of the Return, triangles of marble featuring a map of the slave trade, a person carved from black granite from Zimbabwe, a reflecting pool, all serve as a memorial to the victims of the transatlantic slave trade. Rumors of War is a statue created by artist Kehinde Wiley. It is a towering work of art in all senses. A young black man with dreadlocks wearing a hoodie and Nike sneakers sits astride a muscular stallion. He looks strong and proud, unapologetic in his blackness, or at least that's what I see. Before this statue was moved to its final home in Richmond, Virginia, it stood in Times Square, a spectacle in the center of a spectacle. My wife and I went to look at the statue, to appreciate the scale of it, to see how a black artist challenged how we think of monuments, what deserves to be remembered immemorial. Every culture throughout history has dedicated an unfathomable amount of resources to the preservation of lives lived and lost, monarchic reigns, elected leaders, wars, and the men and women who fought in them, and the deities they worship. It is only in recent years that we have begun to memorialize atrocities and the lives sacrificed to hate and oppression. It is only in recent years that we have acknowledged the importance of reminders of our failings as much as we remember our successes. There are more than 1,700 monuments and other public symbols of the Confederacy still standing in the United States. They memorialize America's original sin, a war lost, lives sacrificed to white supremacy, and the shame of a society more invested in human capital than freedom and dignity. For decades, the fact of these monuments were largely unquestioned, or questions about their place in our society were ignored. These monuments, according to their defenders, preserve history. But that preservation comes at a cost, and they are a constant reminder that some people value a history that was, for their forefathers, quite different from the history of the people they enslaved and fought to keep enslaved. The word monument finds its origins in Latin and French, deriving from the word monere, to remind. But all too often, people revere monuments not because they want a reminder to avoid repeating historical wrongs, but because they want to preserve toxic ideologies, because they want what they know of the world to remain unchallenged. In Richmond, Virginia, Monument Avenue is lined with monuments to Robert E. Lee, Stonewall Jackson, and others. A statue of Jefferson Davis once also stood on the avenue, but it was torn down during a protest following the police murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. Behind the statues of Monument Avenue, there are mansions, some more than 100 years old, monuments to wealth and whiteness, because when the neighborhood was created, only white people were allowed to live there, and this segregation was, for many years, codified by city ordinances. It is supposed to be a different time, but it isn't. State and city officials and local residents continue to fight over the disposition of the remaining monuments and what should or should not be remembered. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, so reading through this, and being struck by that essay, I just felt like you were framing an era, and it just felt like a monument, and the way certain stupid people we all know want to think of it is like the pandemic of wokeness, or whatever dumb thing they want to say that all of this is a different reframing. But I think a book can be a monument to a time, and yours definitely is a testament. And I wonder what you're thinking, because this is just me wanting it to be these things, but I wonder what your thinking was around putting this together, because in a way it's like sort of like a greatest hits album, and I just wonder about how you thought about putting this together.
Yes, well, there are two versions. There's the truth, which is that it had been quite a few years since I published a book for a lot of reasons, but life happens, and sometimes life does not happen kindly, and my family's been dealing with quite a lot. And the words just haven't been coming, but I have Haitian parents, and every day they call me and they tell me how long it's been since I last published a book. And my dad is always like, well, you know, Roxane, it's been 5 years. And I'm just like, you think I don't know? And so I looked at my hard drive and I was like, what have I been doing for the past 5 years? And I realized I had been writing quite a lot. It just wasn't in book form. It was these shorter essays. And I thought it would be great to pull them together because I saw that there were a lot of essays that were working in conversation with one another. And so these aren't my longer pieces, but this is a lot of the opinion writing that I've been doing. Most of them are fairly short. And as I was looking at this body of work that I've created, I saw some natural categories start to emerge, and I wanted to give the book some structure. And the categories are loose, and they're kind of broad, and many of the essays can fit in multiple categories. But on the whole, I just wanted to show my math, so to speak, that I have been up to something. And also, I have a lot of opinions. I do. For better or worse. You should have never told me I was allowed to speak because boy, will I, but only on the page. And so I really was just thinking about, here's a body of work and here are some opinions. And Black women aren't often asked for their opinions. And so it felt really great to be able to call a book Opinions and put them out into the world. And hopefully encourage other Black women to share their opinions loudly.
So in your introduction, you, I think, call yourself an opinion vending machine, or you're treated as an opinion vending machine. And a lot of the work was, asked for really, it sort of takes on this quality of like junk food, like quick, easy, give them what they want. But the pieces, not only individually, but on the whole, do not read like that at all. That's something that comes out of a vending machine, unless it's like one of those really fancy ones at the airport where you're paying like $400 for really nice headphones or something. I wonder what the process is like, not being stuck in that vending machine, quick output style, how it's changed since then.
Yes, I think anyone who writes opinions, especially at the beginning of your career, you are often asked to share something hours after something calamitous or major has happened. And for whatever reason, we are able to rise to that occasion. But you can only do so much in a matter of hours, and I think most of us would admit that we haven't fully thought through what we think or feel about an issue in a matter of hours, especially if it's something that has a lot of gravity to it. And so now I'm at a place in my career where I get to take the time that I need. And if a publication isn't interested in waiting, that's fine, because someone else will be. And so now I tend to take a lot more time and recognize that being first doesn't necessarily mean that you have the best thing to say. And I am glad that I am being afforded the privilege of waiting and thinking and putting, hopefully, what is my most thoughtful ideas forward. And so that's the biggest change. And I also get to bring, hopefully, more rigor to the work because I have more time to do research. Even if that research doesn't explicitly make it onto the page, it informs what I have to say.
So in that, being asked your opinion, and this is a selfish question, because I'm, mostly a fiction writer, and you write incredible fiction. If you all know her only for her nonfiction, which is, amazing and powerful, her fiction is absolutely transcendent and the best you can find. So I wonder if you feel like you were valued in this one way, and this was also what paid the bills, or what was being asked of you. I wonder if you feel like you have a lot more fiction that's sort of been building, and can we hope for something novel-wise or short story-wise?
Oh, yeah. I think of myself primarily as a fiction writer. No one else does, truly, no one else. And that's okay. I actually fell into writing nonfiction around 2008, 2009. Before then, I only wrote fiction, except for like 2 tragic little, I don't know where I belong essays. And there's nothing wrong with that. We are all 23 at some point, and we articulate the experience of that age as best we can. But I am working on 2 novels. And so, yes, there are novels coming. I'm writing a YA novel called The Year I Learned Everything. And it will be out probably in 2025. Oh, I'm working on 3 novels. And I've just remembered. I have an adult novel that I'm not even going to get into yet, but it's ultimately about surrogacy and the choices that women without means are forced to often make. And I'm writing a romance novel with a little-known actor named Channing Tatum. And that one is just for me. That one is just fun. And sexy. He smells like a pine forest.
Can we hear like a 1-sentence plot?
Yes. So you know how oftentimes in film and television, but also in life, people make these weird little pacts, like if we're still single at 40, let's get married. They get married. And then they have to fall in love with each other now that they have made this commitment to one another, and hijinks ensue. Ooh.
So you've written all these pieces already, and we have them in this collection, and it makes the book super readable, because I think a lot of writers know that sometimes books feel readable as short chapters, and it's very enviable, and you can't just fake doing short chapters. It has to be organic. So I wonder what the process is like for you, because this is also true in your short story collection, Haiti. There's a lot of, I want to say flash fiction. I don't know how you feel about that. And also in Difficult Women, you thrive in this form. And I'd love to hear about your process is this thinking toward readability, which you do so well, or is this just natural? Does it come natural to you?
I don't know that it comes natural to me, but there were a lot of longer essays that I've written over the years that I'm saving for a different collection. With this collection, I recognized that it would be strange to have like 30, 1,200, 1,500 word essays and then like a 10,000 word essay. That would just be odd. The, the length is partly just the stricture of opinion writing, especially for a major newspaper, because there's that print consideration. You can only write so many words, and most op-eds, which I call essays because I hate the word op-ed, are between 900 and 1,200 words. And so you have to figure out how to make a rigorous argument in compelling ways in that span of time. And I actually really enjoy that challenge, because if I had my druthers, every essay would be 15,000 words long. I will go on and on and on. I love it. It's just like, let me luxuriate in this prose. Go away. And also, I am actually trained as a rhetorician. My PhD is in rhetoric and technical communication. And so most of my career has been spent at state universities. And when I was in graduate school, I recognized that we were writing to each other and doing nothing to write toward the communities we were a part of, the communities where we were living, the communities where many of our colleagues were living. And that felt weird to me. And as someone who didn't really come from within academia, I thought, well, I actually want to be read. So I think I'm going to write in accessible prose and see how it goes, much to the chagrin of my colleagues. And that was a really good choice, I think, because we shouldn't be hoarding ideas, especially ideas that will affect most of our lives, in the ivory tower. There's nothing wrong with that. If you're an academic and you want to write to other academics, and I get why you're doing that, there's no shame in it. That just wasn't the right choice for me. And so I loved thinking about, how do I construct an argument and distill a complex idea in a way that's accessible, in a way that's readable, and hopefully take some pleasure in some of the sentences. Because sometimes reading academic theory is a fucking slog. Like, I think we've all, anyone who's read some academic work, you're like, oh, wow, why do you hate yourself? Why do you hate me? What did I do?
So speaking of, speaking to no one and trying to speak to everyone, there's something in opinions and in your work in general that I've heard referred to as like the high and the low. And there's a story in IET that I want to say the main character is a Hot Pocket, and the character buys 2 Hot Pockets and eats one, and the other one sort of like spiritually warms him on the curb in front of his house or apartment. And it just struck me as a moment, because I'd been hearing it throughout, of you blending this high-low, which I love, and I don't think should be separated, and I don't think people who are trying, add art should like not include things because they're for whatever judgment reason. So I would love to hear about your thoughts in the way you think about that in your process, and also can you convince everyone here who is not a fan of the Fast and Furious franchise why it is worth watching?
Yes, I can. I can. Welcome to my church. And the thing about culture is that it exists on a spectrum. People always treat it like a binary, but it's not a binary. And I think that the terms highbrow and lowbrow place unnecessary judgments on things. But the reality is the kinds of stuff that we're talking about in a Real Housewives episode are absolutely reflections of gender issues that we deal with in the society at large. And I love to make those connections, to find those connections, and hopefully convince other people that those connections are there. That makes the work exciting to me, and also allows me to watch what I want to watch. Because a lot of prestige television is boring, and I don't want to watch a man making meth. That's not my ministry. But if you like it, that's great. And as for Fast and Furious, there is an essay about Fast and Furious in this book. It's the best franchise ever. And When I had written this, I think there were only 6 movies. Now there are 10, and who knows when 11's going to come out with all of the striking, but it's going to be great because 10 ended on a cliffhanger. But what you need to know is that I don't know that The Rock will ever come back to the franchise, but he glistens and is very muscular, and Vin Diesel glistens and is very muscular, and the sort of goofy cast of characters really kind of goes from movie to movie, and at first they didn't know what they were doing. And so there are 3 disparate movies, 1, 2, and 3, and then they retrofitted the plot to make 1, 2, and 3 make sense in 4 through 10, which, talk about genius. Where is their MacArthur grant? Because that is so amazing. And then scantily clad women dancing around cars, gyrating for no reason. That has nothing to do with the plot. Like, thank you for just putting the misogyny right there for us. And then it's very diverse. Doesn't get enough credit for that. And everyone's very attractive, which does not hurt. And my favorite part is driving face. Whenever they're driving and they're racing, a quarter mile at a time, they have the most intent faces, and you can tell, like, these are not thespians. But when they're driving, Shakespeare-level acting. It's just incredible. So get on board with the Fast and Furious, and start with 1. 2, you don't need to watch at all. You can watch 3 if you want, but then really start with 1. I would do like 1, 4, 5, 6, 3, 7, 8, 9, 10. But however you watch them, they're sort of plug and play.
Well, and it also, in addition to the diverse crew of actors, it sort of upends because the only white guy actually dies in real life, which is the opposite of what happens in a lot of other movies.
Yes, it was really sad. And Paul Walker, by all accounts, was a lovely man. But the weirdest, sort of really most interesting part of that is that they pretend he's still alive in the movies, and he's off babysitting while his wife parenting. And his wife Mia is like, he's at home watching the kids while I go with you to Scotland to try and take this magnetic thing that is going to destroy the world and get it back. It's amazing. Feminism. It worked.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question that you have asked people that you have interviewed, that you reveal in the book. You know the question already. What is your most about your art?
I like that I get to ask that question. When I ask that question, it's because oftentimes we're asked sort of like, what do you hate about yourself? Artfully. And why do we do that? If you're in a position to be interviewed, you've done something right. So let's try and ask people, like, what do you do well? What do you like about your work and how you do it? So I guess my answer to that question would be, I like that I'm willing to take risks on the page, and I'm also willing, within reason, to make myself vulnerable on the page, even though it's terrifying. I do it anyway, even though I'm genuinely terrified. And I like that I have the capacity to do that. I don't know why I do, but it might be because I'm a Libra. So I start there.
So this is maybe kind of a fiction deep cut. It's a very selfish question, and not necessarily geared toward the book, and I hope you'll indulge me. So in Haiti, there's a short story called Sweetness on the Tongue, or
Sweet on the Tongue.
Sweet on the Tongue. It much feels like the seed for an untamed state. And there's even like a Cosby, like, same reference that to me felt like okay, this feels like one came from the other. And I'm not sure if that's true. The short story is incredible and powerful and amazing. And there's a line in it where I was just floored, where one of the characters, I think Maria, it says something about it being lonely somewhere, and the protagonist says, it is lonely everywhere. And I was just blown away. But could you speak to a short story becoming a novel, and am I right about this? And what was that process like to turn that into that, and have them be different things, because they are different things?
For sure. So I wrote a short story called Things I Know About Fairy Tales, and the character Mireille would not leave me. And I realized, and at the time I was shopping around Difficult Women, but it was called something else, and no one was interested at all. And everyone was like, do you have a novel? And I was like, I don't know. I've never written one. And so I started thinking, could I write a novel? And the answer was absolutely not. But then I thought, maybe I'll write 100 little short stories and smush them together. And that's exactly how I approached it. And so I expanded it into an untamed state. At the same time, I wrote Sweet on the Tongue, which is a different set of characters, but a similar scenario. And the reason why is because I was just obsessed with kidnapping at the time. And I was obsessed because my family's from Haiti, and it's a thing that happens. And actually, shortly after I turned the manuscript in, my aunt was kidnapped. And she's okay now, but it's something that tends to hit close to home, and there's really no escaping it, no matter who you are. So I just wondered, not only what is it like to be kidnapped, but what is it like to live in a culture, in a society that is so desperate that taking humans from their lives is a viable option to make money. And I don't have any easy answers, but those questions interest me. And so I wrote the 2 short stories and the novel to try and get at some answers. And I still don't have them, but I'm glad that I did have that ongoing conversation with myself in writing those pieces.
The 2 short stories being the one from Difficult Women with the sisters.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And, well, actually, that makes it 3. And, you know, when you try to make something into a novel from a short story, I just kept thinking, what else happened? What else happened? What else happened? And how can I complicate it? And how can I make it more interesting? And how can I make it more emotional? And so I wrote the novel in the summer after my first year as a faculty member. I was teaching at Eastern Illinois University, and so I was living in Charleston, Illinois, adjacent to a cornfield, literally. It's not even a joke. And there's not much to do in Charleston. A Starbucks opened while I was there, and it was like a holiday. The line was 2 miles down the road, and that was a great latte. And so I wrote all day, every day. I wrote for 8 to 10 hours a day. And when you have no children and you have a summer to yourself, you can actually do that if you want. And so I was also completely immersed in the world of this novel. I would not really talk that much to other people. And when I was talking to people, I was always like sort of itching for the conversation to end so I could get back to it. And I miss that time. I don't know that I'll ever be afforded that kind of time and space again, but it was a great experience. And the novel is flawed, but it was the best I could do at the time with the skills I had.
I think that's what I say when I have to finish a book, and that's definitely what I say. Like, that I couldn't have done it any better, and I have to let it go. And you know, my favorite authors, when I read their earlier books, I don't even like them, so I just have to accept that that's going to be one of the ones that people maybe don't like. So you talk in a couple different chapters and opinions about separating the artist from the art. And I think this is a contentious issue for a lot of people. And I think you really lay it bare and clear. And I agree with your approach. And I had the thought today, like, what if we lived in a world where only monstrous men created beautiful art? Like, how difficult would that be to have to approach art? And luckily, we don't live in that world at all. And there's tons of amazing art by people who are not monstrous. Could you speak to this issue and, like, the division that seems to be, to me, like, not substantive?
Yeah, there is an ongoing debate about how do I separate the art from the artist, and oftentimes it's a veil for how can I enjoy the art I want without having to feel guilty about it. And I don't know, that's a personal question and a personal problem. I find some of these debates just frustrating because the reality is, yes, there are some incredibly talented people that have done some very terrible things, but they're not the only people making art. There is simply no shortage of genius. There's no shortage of filmmakers or novelists or artists. And unfortunately, people tend to take the argument and say, so, oh, is it a purity test now? And it's like, no, but perhaps murder and sexual assault are things that we should have a problem with. And perhaps we should not support the art of people who commit these crimes, especially when they're unapologetic about committing these crimes, when they're defiant about having committed these crimes. And so for me personally, I try as best I can to not consume the art of people who I find abhorrent. But that's a personal choice. I'm not here to dictate what anyone else does. But I do think it's a worthy conversation. And I do think we should ask ourselves why we are so invested in enabling abhorrent people simply because they did something right once. They do more wrong than right all the time, and yet here we are.
Yeah, sometimes it feels like, I was talking to my wife about this today, it feels like it's people's nostalgia for their experience of good art that they're defending. So they're defending their own memories. And there's some, like, layer of compassion there that, you know, you can have. But ultimately, like, the plethora of good art happening by people who aren't monsters, and how accessible it is nowadays to access all of that.
Absolutely. And you know, the thing is, there's so many categories of people below monster. Like, you can be an asshole, you can be petty, you can be immature, you can be disgusting. It's fine. Like, do you. Like, and then there's monster, well above all of that. And so really, I do think a lot of it is nostalgia. And, you know, for me, the thing that I would feel most nostalgic about is The Cosby Show, because I wasn't really allowed to watch TV growing up. We were allowed 1 hour a week. And that hour became extremely exciting when The Cosby Show and A Different World were both on the air at the same time. It was like, oh my God, black people on the screen. And I didn't even think about it in those words. It was just, oh wow, people who kind of look like me, whose lives might be a bit like mine, and I get to see their amazing lives play out. And oh, look at this loving couple, and look at these great kids, and I want to be Denise. Still. And then many years later, we found out that Bill Cosby was an unrepentant serial rapist. And so, however nostalgic I am, and I do remain nostalgic for the show, does that nostalgia matter more than the dozens of women he harmed? No, it doesn't. And that's how I try to reconcile it and ask myself that hard question, like, what's more important? What am I going to value here? And hopefully, more often than not, I will value the right thing.
So you talk a little bit about rage in the book, and I feel like my writing has also been described as, like, rage-filled. And I might have rage in me, sure, but it's not what I'm, like, bringing to the page. It's not part of my process. And as anyone can tell, you know, from witnessing us right now having a conversation, we're reasonable people. But you've had to face a lot of online and critical voices saying, like, you're so angry. And I feel like it's so much and so often projection of people who are like completely just speaking from what they think you must feel or whatever the projection is.
Well, yeah, I think that we both have experienced this, and I think it happens particularly to people of color who dare to speak to realities, who dare to point out the ways in which we deal with oppression on a daily basis in both the sort of micro and macro levels. I'm not angry. I'm just not. Partly I'm a Libra, and I know I've said that before, but it's clearly fundamental. I have like all of my moons and suns in Libra except for one. I'm a super Libra. And my powers are waning now because Scorpio season is nigh. But I'm not even that into astrology, but I'm also a Libra. But black women deal with this all the time. When we say anything, people will be like, oh, why are you so angry? And I'm like, I'm not even doing anything here. I'm just relaxing. I'm having a cup of coffee. And I don't know why that is, but you know, people just don't like being told that life is anything but perfect because they don't want to feel complicit. They don't want to feel responsible. And frankly, they don't want to feel uncomfortable, which is also why we're dealing with all of these book bannings now and things like that. People have forgotten how to tolerate discomfort. And so rather than contend with that, they want to call you angry and blame you for making them feel uncomfortable when they're actually making themselves feel uncomfortable without any input from you. And I also say, because a lot of young women on college campuses ask me, what do I do with my anger because I know it's a problem? And I'm like, says who? When you look at the state of the world and a lot of the challenges many people have to deal with, anger is very appropriate. When you look at the ills of colonization, when you look at the sheer amount of suffering in the wealthiest country in the world, and the hand that we have in creating suffering on a global level, should we not be angry about these things? And why is anger always framed as a bad thing? Because I think sometimes anger can be productive. Sometimes it's dangerous, and we have seen it lead to things like war. But sometimes I do think it's productive, and I do think it creates change. So I do try to have a more expansive understanding of anger and try to encourage more expansive conversations about anger. What do you do when you deal with this question of anger?
Well, I think it comes up, and I wanted to ask you about this too. It comes up in which we're approaching audience Q&A, and I would never expect the Oakland audience to be a part of this, but I've traveled a lot, as have you, and you've taken a lot of, I'm sure, bad questions, and the questions that enrage you, that really, like, there's so much dumb happening in the question that you can only like be mad and like either lash back or move on. And I found that when I was able to, like, unpacking the whole thing and why it's such a dumb question was the best route. And it really diffused my own anger, and it sort of let out, like, it just the unpacking. Did you ever find that that was something you ended up doing? And is there a famously entertaining bad question you can share with us?
Yes, I actually have it right at the top of my tongue. I was at Berea College about 5 or 6 months ago. It's a small liberal arts school in Ohio. It's a school where Bell Hooks made her intellectual home for many, many years. But this was after she passed. And I was giving a talk to most of the campus. And I had mentioned at one point during the onstage conversation with a faculty member that I'm not going to sit around chit-chatting with Klan members. And that if people want to sort of reach across that particular bridge to create change, feel free, but I don't know that that's the bridge we should be crossing. Like, they're not, they feel what they feel. And it's not my personal ministry to like bring them over to the side of decency. And during the Q&A, a young man stood up, and anytime you see this guy stand up, you just know it's going to be some bullshit. And I was just like, oh, brother, because his voice started shaking. And I was like, he knows he's about to say some funky shit. And he's worried about what's going to happen. And he said, you know, I really don't like what you said about not wanting to sit down with Klanspeople. They have a point of view, too. And I was like, And he didn't really have a question. It was more of a comment than a question. And I just told myself, Roxane, this is a child. He's 19 years old. Don't bring out the cannon. Bring out the water gun. And so I sat there, but at the same time, I didn't want it to go unchecked. Because what you're saying is that I should be comfortable with the fact that you are comfortable with racists. And so I said, young man, listen, I don't need to sit with you or your father. I'm going to hell, I know. But I said, maybe you should ask yourself why you can't disabuse yourself of your bigotries before we have a conversation. Why do I have to put in the effort? Because there's nothing wrong with me. I'm just living my best Black life. You have a problem with that. And so I did try to unpack it as generously as I could, but I was also a little petty. And I know I was right, too.
So you sort of answer this already in the book, but I think it's worth revisiting because I think it's an interesting thing as what you write and how you change as a person is all changing at once, and reactions to the book and your own internal reactions to your own work changes over time in addition to opinions. So Sarah A. is asking, as you gathered and selected the essays for this book, did you find that any of your opinions had changed? P.S. Love the memes and funny videos you post on IG.
Thank you. I do my best work on Instagram. I have to say, I curate TikToks for a living. That's my second job. My dad, of all people, got me into TikTok because he was like, have I watched Haitian TikTok? And I was like, you know what TikTok is? And then I was like, ooh, let me go find Haitian TikTok. It's amazing. Highly recommend. It's tops. But no, my opinions haven't changed about anything. But I don't mean that in an arrogant way. Most of my opinions are things that I would hope my opinions haven't changed on, like women are people and deserve bodily autonomy. Police brutality is egregious, and we have over-militarized our police. Like, no, those opinions aren't going to change. But I have hopefully gotten more progressive. And where maybe 10 years ago I would say, for example, the police should be reformed. Now I'm like, no. We need to abolish the prison system. We need to abolish the police. And, you know, we do. You cannot reform it. It's just that corrupt and that evil. And the way that we treat law enforcement in this country has bled into everyone policing each other all the time. That's how addictive it is to wield that kind of control over one another. And so I think as a culture, we need to sit with that. Why are we so obsessed with policing each other all the time? And why do we not create any path toward redemption for anyone? Why are we only interested in the punishment and not what might come after? So that's how I've hopefully evolved. And I'm doing a lot of reading because that's not my area of expertise, but I've been reading books by like Marianne Kaba and other people who are working in this space thinking about what restorative justice can look like. And because I struggle with it. Like, I'm like, no, you can put him under the prison. Donald Trump, for example. We don't need to restore justice for that. Just for everyone else. But I'm a work in progress, and I do want to get to a place where we can hopefully, as a community, everywhere, come up with better ideas, because what we're doing clearly isn't working. It's not a deterrent, and when you put people in cages, they are going to act accordingly. So I don't have easy answers, but I do hopefully continue to get more progressive and recognize that liberation is the only way forward.
So I'm going to add a little bit to this question. The question is, how did you get the opportunity to write the workplace ethics column in the New York Times? And I want to know, because part of the book, toward the end, is your advice. Ask Roxane, which is amazing, especially the love piece that you write. I want to know how you got that, and does it still exist, and why not?
Well, when I did ask Roxane, I just told my editor, my opinion editor, I would like to write some advice because I love advice. And she was like, okay. It was that simple. And then she actually moved over to the business section and said, hey, do you want to take over WorkFriend? And at the time, WorkFriend was being done in 13-week stints, or I'm sorry, 26-week stints, half a year, every 2 weeks. And then they just kept me on forever and ever. And now I've done 81 of them. And it just, I was there and I was interested. I love giving people advice. I will tell you how to live your life. No problem. Leave him, leave her, quit your job. It's all the same. Quit your job. And of course, the reality is that most of us can't just up and quit our jobs, and so then the advice becomes more complex. But it just happened that way. I fell into it by having an editor who moved from one section to the other. Because one thing people don't know about the Times is that people move around the organization constantly, and for lots of reasons. And so that was really interesting, and I love doing WorkFriend. In fact, when I get back to my hotel, I'm going to finish this week's column. And one of the questions is a question I'm asked every week. I work with someone who smells really bad. What do I do about it? And I'm afraid to confront him. And it's like, girl, you're going to have a conversation. Or you're going to suffer. Wear a mask. It's the right thing to do anyway, you know? Anyway, advice is great. I love Dear Prudie. I read it obsessively.
Okay, so if hindsight was 2020, what book of yours would you release first? This is a sort of PS. Also, thank you for writing Hunger. It changed my life.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You know what? I would release the book I released first, IET, because it's a book I wrote about being part of the Haitian diaspora, and that's a very big part of who I am and how I live my life, so I wouldn't change how I did it.
What do you love doing when not writing?
I'm sorry, I'm 12. I enjoy reading, walks on the beach. But I do read for pleasure every day, and I love watching television, especially procedurals, and I feel so bad about it because it's propaganda and we all know it, but they're so compelling. What's going to happen next? I'm watching Chicago Fire right now, and it's not a good show. But it's been on for 11 seasons, and I'm on season 3. And the firefighters aren't even that interesting. It's so weird, but it's just very soothing. And I enjoy going to theater, live music, Beyonce. Renaissance was so good. And hanging out with my wife is actually my favorite thing to do. And we have a dog, and his name is Maximus Toretto Blueberry. Yes, Toretto, after Vin Diesel's character in The Fast and Furious. And my wife, who's a Scorpio, is endlessly interesting. And it's just like every day I wake up and I'm like, oh my God, we get to do activities today. And it's so exciting because like I can want to do something completely random and I'll be like, hey, by any chance, do you want to go do this completely random thing you have no interest in? And she'll be like, yeah. And it's just like, awesome. Wow. And so it's a gift. And I did not expect it in my life at all. And so now to have found like built-in awesomeness and also sexy awesomeness, I highly recommend.
So this question is, what authors inspire you these days? And I would love to know, just to add on to the question, what new fiction do you feel like is really exciting, like that's doing like really cool things in fiction right now?
I just finished Let Us Descend by Jessamine Ward, which came out today. And she's extraordinary. You know, like when someone's really brilliant and you think, is this going to be their sophomore slump? Their like junior slump? No. She's brilliant all the time. And this novel is stunning. It's beautifully written. It takes risks. It's just, I don't even know how else to explain it other than that it's exquisite. And I loved it, and I read it in one sitting. And I love when a novel pulls me in and I don't want to come back out. So I love Jessamine Ward. I love Zadie Smith. I don't care. I do. She's amazing. N.W., which nobody likes, but I do, I think is her best novel. And I stand by that. I love Kiese Layman, both in terms of his fiction and his nonfiction. I read a lot of Tressie McMillan Cottom. I think her mind is extraordinary. And I'm always interested in seeing what she's going to say and how. And it just, there's always something that she has to say. She recently wrote an essay about Ozempic. And I thought it was a very necessary intervention in the Ozempic discourse because people are having the wrong conversations about Ozempic. Yes, we can talk about wealthy people moving to the front of the line. That's a huge problem. That's a pharmaceutical industry greed problem. But many people are taking like almost glee in the side effects. And I saw someone on social media say, oh, this is going to be great, just like with fen-phen and some other thing. And I was like, do you know what actually happened with fen-phen? People died. And people are willing to die to lose weight. So perhaps there's a bigger critique. And so when someone opens up that conversation and is willing to talk about the bigger critique or the bigger issue at play instead of the low-hanging fruit, I'm all in. So those are some of the top writers that I love.
So this person is asking, I can't read what their name says. You do so much for emerging voices on your Substack. How do you discover them? What is your curation strategy?
Yes, one of the great things that I get to be able to do is on my newsletter, every 2 weeks I run an essay from a writer who has 3 or fewer publications. And I just open up submissions and people submit their work to me. And I pick the work that speaks to me most. It's really that simple. I am fortunately, I pay for it myself out of pocket, and I pay every writer $2,000. And so it costs $50,000 a year to do, and I'm happy to do that. I'm happy I'm in a position to be able to do that, but I have to say no far more than I can say yes. And so I do curate it by really looking for work that feels different and extraordinary. Like last week I published an essay from a young woman who wrote about being adopted and then learning that her birth parents were secret agents, or, you know, like, what? And the essays cover the gamut. So there's no one thing that I'm looking for, but in every single one of these essays, there's potential. There's a confident voice ready, even if it's not quite there, it's at the surface, just breaching. And it's someone who you think, I want to be reading you in 10 years, 20 years, etc. And it's competitive, and that's okay. All of writing is. And I do it with I have 2 staff members who work for me. And Meg Pillow, who's my project manager, helps me reading the submissions and flags for me the ones that she thinks are the best. And that's incredibly helpful. And she also does all of the line editing and sort of developmental editing. And so I'll shout out to Meg Pillow as well, who really helps make the series come to life.
So as a final question, if you could share with us this Oakland crowd, this beautiful big Oakland crowd, something of your experience from Oakland today, in the past, that, you know, that we get to hear from Roxane Gay's lens about Oakland?
Let me think. That's an interesting question. You know, the thing that I always think about Oakland is everyone here is just interesting. And I mean that not in the bad way. Every time I come here, the audiences are just unique and full of questions and generous, and you never know who's going to show up. Like today I ran into the amazing Disha Filia, who's here and is an extraordinary writer. She has 2 amazing books coming out in the next few years that you are going to want to read, and if you haven't already read The Secret Lives of Church Ladies, please check it out. It's a short story collection. And so I just love that all kinds of really interesting people like you're here and were able and willing to do this conversation with me. And like there's people sleep on Oakland. Lots and lots of great writers and great thinkers and great artists are here, and I love that about Oakland. And it's always a unique place, and it just makes me like the Bay Area because San Francisco is a bit, it's just different. There are not a lot of people of color walking around oftentimes in the parts of San Francisco that I tend to go to, and I'm always like, really? Oakland's right there. So, you know, it's always nice to be on this side of the bridge.
Well, thank you for sharing this book with the world, all of this work that you've done over all of these years, fiction and nonfiction. Thank you for this time you shared with me on stage and with all of us here. I hope we can get a big round of applause for Roxane Gay coming out to Oakland.